So my name is Richard Vercoe. My home department within the Integrative Conservation Program is in geography. And what I'd like to present to you today is just a big picture, very high-level scale of what I'm intending to do for my dissertation research, and also specifically point out a few core methods or techniques that I'd like to use and get your feedback or thoughts or maybe even experiences that you may have had in either a related topic using those techniques or other approaches that you might consider applicable. So I think it's overly ambitious, but I'm going to try and get around 10 minutes in to do the proposal, a bit of the problem statement of what's going on in this area, some background regarding it, and then some of my research design, and then hopefully reserve at least a few minutes to get some verbal feedback from you, but otherwise get some written after the fact. What I'm proposing to do is to conduct a critical analysis of a program called the Chile Project in southern Chile. And the idea is to better understand and represent socioeconomic and agroecological implications of a large-scale sustainable conservation initiative for improving local and regional well-being. And this research is intended to be both applied as well as critical or theoretical towards local conservation activities around agricultural knowledge, practices, and genetic biodiversity, as well as to have some application ideally for future cooperative multi-scalar conservation initiatives. The problem of what's going on is that we have, just like species that are going extinct and disappearing on Earth, we also have domestic crop species, or technically the germplasm behind those, are disappearing as well very rapidly around the Earth. And that's been identified as a key problem for our ability to produce currently and definitely into the future our necessary food. Specifically around, in this case, not speaking about animals, but primarily around the dominant crops such as wheat, corn, rice, and in my case, potatoes. And that's right there is the top 4 food items that are consumed around the world. And I'll be looking at, these are the germplasm centers of origin here, and that coincidentally seems to be the places where they're focusing currently on trying to conserve those, because in many cases, these places, actual locations of the identified as the origin of the germplasm diversity, have been areas where they are still maintaining really the most diverse sources of germplasm for those particular, in this case, number 10 being potatoes. So one initiative that's begun by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization is what's called the Globally Important Agricultural Heritage Systems Program. You can sort of think of it like World Heritage for food. Right? And so instead of Notre Dame Cathedral or a castle, they're trying to preserve crop systems and the diversity of those crops themselves. But it's not just a building, or in this case, a potato variety that they're attempting to engage with, but it's actually the agricultural knowledge, the cultural practices, and the ecological dynamics that went into the creation of those diverse varieties to begin with. And so in the case of Chile, it's the objective is to encourage primarily sort of a political awareness campaign to recognize Chile as a source of culture, traditions, and wide genetic biodiversity, but also to stimulate, ideally with this recognition, sustainable development in these archipelago and this island chains, and make the society aware of the importance, and the society not just the locals they're referring to, but the greater global awareness of the importance of protection and conservation of biodiversity. And the project has several phases of implementation, but one thing I want to point out is sort of the third and 4th bullet point here, is that it's promoting a creation of policies related to biodiversity conservation, and it's intended to intervene in creating interest in local, regional, and state political frameworks. And so this is a very overtly politically focused initiative, not just something where it's about creating awareness, but actually engaging in political processes and systems. And this is in part through some economic incentivization that I will mention in a moment. So the papachilota is, in this region, they have over 200 varieties that have been identified, and through recent tests they found that 99% of all the potatoes that are consumed around the world have this is sort of their parent material, is the Chile potatoes. So it does have specific significance, at least as far as for potato eaters like myself. And it's in the area of southern Chile here, And this is essentially right where the Central Valley of Chile and the coastal range now breaks up into a series of island chains. And the first island happens to be the largest of all those chains, and that's Chiloé Island. Chile has also experienced 2 revolutions at least, and I'm not referring to political, social revolutions, although these have similar implications. One is the Green Revolution. Chile has achieved a renown for being one of the bread baskets of the world, and that was a result of, for example, this image of a potato farm in central Chile on the left, through the intervention of industrial production, chemical aids in the case of fertilizers, and also there's presence of genetically modified organisms in these areas. But the area of Chiloé, this is an actual contemporary picture. It still has been somewhat exempt from this particular revolution. It didn't make it down there for both ecological as well as social isolation issues that I won't go into detail about today. But this is the type of product that is coming from that type of a scale of activity on a half-acre to 2-acre lots. The second revolution, though, is what I'm more interested in, and it's the one that's very urgently occurring in this area, and this is the Blue Revolution that maybe you have or haven't heard of, but it is sort of the biggest revolution. They're saying it is the revolution of the 21st century, where the green was of the 20th, and that is aquaculture. This is a scene on the left is of a local Chilote community practicing subsistence, not only potato production, agricultural, but also fishing operations like the artisan level that was discussed before our lunch break. And on the right, you see aquaculture, specifically salmon. Chile is now the #2 producer of farm salmon in the world, and it is the #1 producer of any Atlantic farm salmon that you eat. 95% of that is coming from this region of the world. Of course, salmon is not native or endemic to any part of the southern hemisphere. So this is creating some new ecological as well as social dynamics. In this region, they experienced a boom, bust, and now they're theorizing a boom. We'll see how long that lasts. This $3 billion industry in 2006 employed 35,000 of the local Chilote islanders, primarily, almost exclusively, all of the male inhabitants. There was really no job offers or positions for females, and so that initiated some very distinct gender dynamics, as well as the work time. The labor issues that went around this was 16-hour days, 6 days a week, and very exposed conditions, as well as the economic component of where these people were getting paid in pesos in this case, but in currency rather than the subsistence type of dynamics that they were practicing previous to that. So they no longer had the time to engage in some of their subsistence practices, but they had money to buy their food from elsewhere now. Well, a complete collapse happened in 2007. 95% die-off rate of all of the salmon in this whole region. This is a huge region. And that was due specifically to infectious salmon anemia. It was identified due to overpopulation of the production cultivation centers, right? So they're too close for comfort, and the ecological system of these fjords couldn't flush the filth and the other processes that were being introduced into these pens, antibiotics and other sea lice and other issues that kind of accelerated this process to a complete collapse where the state had to intervene and call a 2-year moratorium to sort of hit reboot on the system and see if the actual environment could recover and then slowly reintroduce aquaculture back into this system. Because it is a 700,000 ton industry on a given year, and it's moved back up to about that, they estimate, for this 2012 year that I have statistics for. But it's an issue that, as you see on the bottom, didn't just affect the ocean, though. It actually had very direct effects on this agroecological system, specifically through the labor relationships that happened of shifting the human piece in this very unique system of potato cultivation in this particular case, but the other species that consisted, they've identified that the environment there, the ecosystem, is a co-evolved system at this point over 6,000 years. And you shifted this dramatically, and it caused other sort of ecological chains, both terrestrial as well as in the marine environment, aside from directly impacting the source of algae and other things that they use to help propagate their potatoes. So big picture theoretical, it's integrating some approaches. Agri-food studies, critical conservation, and GIS and remote sensing are huge umbrellas, I realize, and so I'm not going to attempt to just tackle all of those, but I'm looking at some subsets that hopefully are a bit more manageable for myself, and that's within agri-food studies, is looking at labeling and food sovereignty. Specifically, the labeling is about a trademark that the UN is associating with this GIHS system, where each of these program sites would have their own UN trademark to be able to stamp onto products such as potatoes or services such as agro-tourism operations that would exist within these regions or as products from these regions as part of a long-term development initiative. Community-based conservation is looking at really just the initiatives and the problematics of something that in this particular case was initiated from the community level, which is actually unique within the pilot programs. It's the only one that was proposed by the community rather than by the actual nation state bringing it to the UN and saying we should do this here sort of approach. And then participatory GIS, looking at citizen involvement and representation processes through mapping. So the mixed methods is including institutional analyses, also field visits, and then the remote sensing. I want to skip through some of the details of this for the moment and just talk about two approaches that I'm using is making the most of my ICON internship requirement, is doing one with the Ministry of Agriculture, specifically the Office of Research and Political Agronomy, is they've asked if I would help them look at identifying, based on the standards of the GIAH proposition, identify other potential agricultural heritage sites within Chile. Like if this is a great rural development program, can we find other places to do this with? But through that, I want to use that as a mechanism also for this specific research to conduct interviews with ministers, administrators, the field technicians that are implementing some of these, and through discourse analysis of documents as well as the actual practices, what do they look like on the ground, as well as what's the politics back in Santiago, of how the implementation of this particular Chiloé trademark will work. Thanks. The second is through a second part of my internship process will be with the Center of Education and Technology. This was the local community organization that proposed this or submitted the proposal to the UN and was accepted, which caused a lot of problems in the main government with the Ministry of Agriculture, that they were made known of this after the fact that the UN had already accepted it and kind of been in dialogue with this. And so there's some political dynamics there that are very fierce at work. So through participatory research, be conducting agri-ecology workshops, seed saving such as this that I took pictures from just this last July down there, and seed swapping, as well as repatriation of local germplasm. This is the National Potato Lab down in University of Southern Chile, and they're interested. The main identity that they found in the loss of germplasm is that holding this up in a seed bank up in the Arctic region is not nearly as effective, we found, as actual in situ conservation with the communities and the agricultural and ecological knowledge that went into producing those diverse varieties in the first place. And then GIS and remote sensing to create sort of a visual timeline. And I'm really fascinated to look at, ideally, the dynamic between the appearance, disappearance, and reappearance of the salmon farms along all of these coastal areas right offshore of these communities, and how that related to land use change. And so that's where I'll be bringing in the GIS mapping, and specifically what I want to propose is using QGIS, an open source GIS technology, to actually establish some GIS labs within the communities that I'll be living and working with. Chile is one of the first countries in the world that's going full public access to internet, and it also has a lot of computers available in even rural communities, so I feel like this is a viable potential option here. And in this case, just to highlight one deliverable that I would like to achieve from this would be something like interactive mapping. This was a map that I actually did for my thesis work, looking at current trading routes based on ancestral networks that existed between potato and forest trading networks, but doing something related to potato variety production and the salmon farm. So to kind of sums it up in this picture here with the salmon farms, as you can see, just literally right off the coast, and the local communities there that are interacting with them. Thank you.